Scarlett Reeves was a rising star in the world of corporate law when she first encountered Darren Felton at a charity gala in Richmond. At 28, she was ambitious, brilliant, and strikingly beautiful. Darren, 15 years her senior, was immediately smitten. As the CEO of his successful manufacturing company, he exuded power and confidence. His salt and pepper hair and tailored suit spoke of wealth and influence, and Scarlett found herself drawn to his charisma and worldly experience. Their courtship was a whirlwind of expensive dinners, weekend getaways, and lavish gifts. Darren would Scarlett with the kind of attention and luxury she had always dreamed of, but never experienced in her middle-class upbringing. Within 6 months, he had proposed with a diamond ring that could have paid off her student loans twice over. The wedding was the social event of the season in Sunnyside, where Darren had recently relocated his company headquarters. Scarlett walked down the aisle of the town's historic chapel, resplendent in a designer gown, her face glowing with what appeared to be joy and love. As they exchanged vows, neither could have predicted how quickly their fairy tale would unravel. The first year of marriage seemed idyllic on the surface. Scarlett left her job in Richmond to become the perfect society wife, throwing herself into charity work and social events, but behind closed doors cracks began to appear. Darren's controlling nature, at first masked as protectiveness, became suffocating. He questioned her every move, criticized her choices, and slowly isolated her from her former colleagues and friends. Scarlett found herself trapped in a gilded cage, her once vibrant personality dimming under the weight of Darren's expectations. She tried to rekindle her legal career, but Darren vehemently opposed the idea, insisting that his wife need not work. Their arguments became more frequent, their silence is more prolonged. As the years passed, the Feltons maintained a facade of marital bliss for the town to see. They hosted elaborate dinner parties, attended every important social function, and donated generously to local causes. But those closest to them noticed the strain. Scarlett's smiles never quite reached her eyes, and Darren's possessive hand on her waist seemed more like a shackle than a loving gesture. By their 5th anniversary, the love that had once burned so brightly had been reduced to cold ashes. They slept in separate bedrooms, their conversations reduced to terse exchanges about household matters and social obligations. It was into this atmosphere of quiet desperation that Chris Felton would arrive, unknowingly setting in motion a chain of events that would end in bloodshed. The summer of 2017 brought an unexpected change to the Felton household. Chris, Darren's 18-year-old son from his first marriage, arrived in Sunnyside with little more than a duffel bag and a rebellious attitude. Handsome and standing at 6 feet tall, Chris's childhood had been marked by his parents' bitter divorce when he was just 5 years old. His mother Adrian had struggled with addiction, leaving Darren to gain full custody. However, Darren's demanding career meant that Chris was primarily raised by a series of nannies in boarding schools. The result was a young man who felt abandoned by both parents, harboring a deep-seated resentment towards his father. After a tumultuous freshman year at college marked by academic probation and a stint in rehab for alcohol abuse, Chris had been given an ultimatum by Darren: come home, work for Felton his company, and get his life together, or be cut off entirely. With few options and even less enthusiasm, Chris had grudgingly agreed. Scarlett's first encounter with her stepson was awkward at best. She had met him briefly at the wedding 5 years prior, but the selling 14-year-old had transformed into a strikingly handsome young man. For his part, Chris was taken aback by Scarlett's youth and beauty. Having expected someone closer to his father's age, Darren wasted no time in putting Chris to work. Insisting he started the bottom of the company ladder, this meant long hours at the factory, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. It was a punishing schedule designed to instill discipline, but it only served to deepen the rift between father and son. As the weeks passed, Scarlett found herself increasingly drawn to Chris's presence in the house. His youthful energy and rebellious spirit were a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere she had grown accustomed to. She began to look forward to their brief interactions, a shared laugh over breakfast, a sympathetic smile when Darren was being particularly demanding. Little did any of them realize that Chris's arrival had set the stage for a dangerous attraction that would soon spiral out of control, threatening to destroy the fragile balance of the Felton family forever. The catalyst for Scarlett and Chris's illicit relationship came on a sweltering August night. Darren was away on a business trip, leaving Scarlett alone in the vast empty house. Unable to sleep in the oppressive heat, she had gone downstairs for a glass of water, only to find Chris in the kitchen, shirtless and glistening with sweat after a late-night run. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Scarlett found herself mesmerized by the defined muscles of his chest, the vulnerable look in his eyes, so unlike his father's hard gaze. Chris in turn was struck by Scarlett's beauty. Her silk nightgown clinging to her curves in the humid air, they talked for hours that night, sharing confidences they had never dared voice before. Scarlett spoke of her frustrations with Darren, her feelings of being trapped and unfulfilled. Chris opened up about his troubled relationship with his father, his struggles with addiction, and his dreams of breaking free from the Felton legacy. As dawn broke, they found themselves drawn together, their lips meeting in a kiss that was equal parts passion and desperation. It was a moment of weakness that would have far-reaching consequences in the days that followed. Scarlett and Chris tried to forget what had happened, to chalk it up to a moment of madness. But the attraction between them had been unleashed, and it proved impossible to ignore. Stolen glances across the dinner table, lingering touches as they passed in the hallway. Every interaction was charged with forbidden desire. Their first real tryst occurred 2 weeks later. Darren had fallen asleep early, as he often did after drinking too much scotch. Scarlett slipped out of their bedroom and made her way to the pool house, where Chris had taken up residence. Under the cover of darkness, they gave in to their passion, their lovemaking urgent and frantic, both aware of the enormous risk they were taking. As the affair deepened, so did their emotional connection. Scarlett rediscovered parts of herself she thought long buried. Her wit, her adventurous spirit, her capacity for joy. Chris, for his part, found in Scarlett the love and acceptance he had always craved. They began to imagine a future together, away from Darren's controlling influence and the suffocating expectations of society. But reality had a way of intruding on their fantasies. The guilt weighed heavily on both of them, particularly Scarlett. She was acutely aware of the betrayal, not just of her marriage vows, but of the trust Darren had placed in her as a stepmother to his son. Chris struggled with his own conflicting emotions, the thrill of the affair warring with his complicated feelings towards his father. Despite the risks, they found it impossible to end their relationship. They began to take greater chances, meeting in secluded spots around town, exchanging passionate emails, and even sneaking away for a weekend trip under the guise of Scarlett visiting an old college friend. As autumn approached, their affair had become all-consuming. Scarlett walked a constant tightrope, playing the role of devoted wife while secretly planning rendezvous with Chris. She knew that what they were doing was dangerous, potentially ruinous for all involved. But in Chris's arms, she felt alive for the first time in years. Neither Scarlett nor Chris could have foreseen the tragic turn their secret passion would take. As they continued to weave their web of lies and stolen moments, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the carefully constructed facade of the Felton family and leave an indelible mark on the town of Sunnyside. As summer faded into fall, Scarlett Felton found herself caught in an increasingly complex web of deceit. By day, she maintained her role as the perfect society wife, attending charity luncheons, hosting dinner parties, and standing dutifully by Darren's side at corporate events. But in stolen moments, hidden from the prying eyes of Sunnyside's gossip-hungry residents, she was a woman transformed, alive with passion in the arms of her young lover. The strain of her double life began to take its toll. Scarlett lost weight. Her appetite diminished by the constant stress of maintaining her secret. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. Poorly concealed by expensive concealers, she jumped at unexpected noises, always fearing discovery. Chris too felt the pressure of their clandestine affair. His performance at work suffered as he spent more time thinking about Scarlett than focusing on his tasks. He became withdrawn, avoiding the company of his coworkers and the few friends he had made in town. His nights were spent either in secret rendezvous with Scarlett or lying awake, torn between exhilaration and guilt. Their need for each other grew increasingly reckless. They began to take greater risks, meeting in less discreet locations. Once they narrowly avoided discovery when Darren unexpectedly returned home early from a business trip, forcing Chris to hide under the bed for hours until he left. Another time, a nosy neighbor nearly caught them in an embrace in the garden. The constant fear of exposure was matched only by the addictive thrill of their forbidden romance. Each close call, rather than serving as a warning, seemed to fuel their passion further. They reveled in the excitement of secret codes, clandestine messages, and elaborate plans, required to steal even a few moments alone. Yet beneath the surface, doubts began to creep in. Scarlett found herself wondering if she was truly in love with Chris, or simply infatuated with the idea of escape he represented. Chris, for his part, grappled with conflicting feelings about his father. Despite years of resentment, he couldn't fully shake the guilt of betraying Darren in the most personal way possible. As autumn progressed, the weight of their secret became almost unbearable. Both Scarlett and Chris knew that something had to give. They couldn't continue living this double life indefinitely, but neither was prepared for the violent way their carefully constructed house of cards would come crashing down around them. As October arrived, bringing with it a chill in the air and the first hints of falling leaves, the atmosphere in the Felton household grew increasingly tense. Darren, once content to bury himself in work and scotch, began to take notice of the subtle changes in his wife and son, but as the weeks were on, his suspicions deepened. He noticed Scarlett's sudden interest in her appearance, buying new clothes and spending more time at the salon. Chris, usually sullen and argumentative, had become almost docile, agreeing to work overtime without complaint, and even joining Darren for the occasional drink after work. The turning point came when Darren overheard a snippet of conversation between two of his employees at the factory. They quickly fell silent as he approached, but not before he caught a mention of Chris's name and something about the boss's wife. The seed of doubt, once planted, began to grow rapidly. Darren's behavior shifted subtly, but noticeably. He began to come home from work at unpredictable hours. His eyes narrowed with suspicion as he surveyed the house upon arrival. He asked probing questions about Scarlett's daily activities and Chris's whereabouts. His tone casual, but his gaze intense. In-town whispers began to circulate. Sharp-eyed neighbors had noticed Scarlett's car parked near the lake at odd hours, or Chris slipping out of the house late at night. Scarlett and Chris, caught up in the intoxicating rush of their affair, remained oblivious to the growing suspicions around them. They continued their secret meetings, each one a little more daring than the last, convinced that their careful planning and discreet behavior had kept their relationship hidden. But as Halloween approached, bringing with it the promise of masquerades and secrets, the truth was creeping ever closer to the surface. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the peaceful facade of the community and forever changed the lives of everyone involved. Tonight of October 30, 2018 began like any other in the Felton household. Darren had announced over dinner that he would be working late. Scarlett and Chris exchanged subtle glances, their pulses quickening at the prospect of an unexpected opportunity to be alone. As Darren's car pulled out of the driveway, Scarlett felt the familiar mix of excitement and guilt wash over her. She waited a prudent 30 minutes before making her way to the pool house, where Chris was waiting. Their passionate embrace was tinged with a sense of desperation. Both were acutely aware that their time together might be running out. Unknown to them, Darren had not gone to the office. Acting on his growing suspicions, he had driven around the block and parked his car out of sight. Then stealthily made his way back to the house. As he crept through the darkened garden, the glow from the pool house windows caught his attention. Moving closer, he heard muffled voices and laughter, sounds that stopped him cold in his tracks. Through a gap in the curtains, Darren saw a scene that shattered his world. Scarlett and Chris were entwined on the small bed, their naked bodies illuminated by candlelight. The intimacy of their embrace left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. For a moment, Darren stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the betrayal unfolding before his eyes. Then a red haze of rage descended. He burst through the pool house door, his sudden appearance causing Scarlett to scream and Chris to leap to his feet. What followed was a blare of violence and shouted accusations. Darren lunged at Chris, his fist connecting with his son's face and body. Scarlett tried to intervene, only to be shoved aside with such force that she crashed into a glass table, shards cutting into her skin. The commotion drew the attention of a neighbor who called 911 reporting sounds of a violent altercation. But by the time police sirens could be heard in the distance, the confrontation had already reached its tragic climax. In the chaotic struggle, Darren's hand had closed around a heavy ashtray. Flying with rage, he swung at it Chris, the impact producing a sickening crack as it connected with his son's skull. Chris crumpled to the floor, blood pooling rapidly around his head. The sight of Chris's still form seemed to snap Darren out of his frenzy. He staggered backward, the bloody ashtray slipping from his grasp. Scarlett, ignoring her own injuries, rushed to Chris's side. Desperately trying to stem the flow of blood, it was at this moment that Darren made a fateful decision. His life as he knew it was over. His marriage a sham. His son gravely injured by his own hand. In a final desperate act, he reached for the handgun he kept hidden in his study. Scarlett, hearing Darren's movements, looked up just in time to see him raise the gun. Her scream was drowned out by two deafening shots. Darren's body jerked as the bullets tore through him, and he collapsed to the floor. Seconds later, the first police officers burst into the house, following the trail of destruction to the pool house. They were met with a scene of carnage. Darren dead on the floor, Chris unconscious and critically injured, and Scarlett covered in blood, cradling Chris's head in her lap. As paramedics rushed in and the house became a flurry of activity, Detective Rowan Thorne arrived on the scene, looking at the devastation before him. He knew that unraveling the events of this night would be one of the most challenging cases of his career. Little did he know that the truth would be even more complex and heartbreaking than this blood-soaked scene suggested. In the days following the tragedy at the Felton residence, the town was gripped by shock and morbid fascination. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the property as a stream of investigators came and went, piecing together the events of that fateful night. Detective Rowan Thorne took charge of the investigation, his normally impassive face betraying the gravity of the situation. His first order of business was to interview Scarlett, the only conscious witness to the crime. She sat in the sterile interrogation room at the police station, her haunted eyes rimmed with dark circles. Scarlett's account of the night's events was disjointed and emotional. She admitted to the affair with Chris, describing how their relationship had developed over the summer. She recounted Darren's violent reaction upon discovering them together and his subsequent suicide. Throughout her statement, Scarlett's concern seemed focused primarily on Chris's condition, barely acknowledging her husband's death. Meanwhile, forensics teams combed through the Felton home, collecting evidence that would help corroborate or contradict Scarlett's story. They discovered a journal in Darren's study. Its final entries revealing his growing suspicions and the toll they had taken on his mental state. Emails and text messages retrieved from the family's devices painted a picture of a household fraught with tension and secret communications. Chris, meanwhile, lay in a coma in the ICU of the General Hospital. Doctors were uncertain if he would ever regain consciousness. And if he did, what information he might be able to provide about the night's events. Scarlett spent every possible moment by his bedside, her video raising eyebrows among the hospital staff and fueling further gossip in town as the investigation progressed. Detective Thorne found himself grappling with inconsistencies in the evidence. The angle of Darren's gunshot wounds didn't quite match Scarlett's description of events. Trace evidence suggested that the crime scene might have been altered before police arrived, and then there was the matter of Darren's life insurance policy, a multi-million-dollar payout that named Scarlett as the sole beneficiary. With each new piece of evidence, the detective felt he was moving further from the truth rather than closer to it. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. Darker secrets yet to be uncovered beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family and their picturesque small-town life. As weeks passed, Detective Thorne's investigation took unexpected turns, revealing layers of deception that went far beyond a simple affair. Each new discovery painted a more complex picture of the Felton family dynamics and the events leading up to that fatal night. A breakthrough came when Chris finally regained consciousness. His statement, given in halting words between bouts of pain and confusion, differed significantly from Scarlett's account. Chris spoke of a plan, not just to continue the affair but to eliminate Darren permanently. According to Chris, it was Scarlett who had suggested that they murder her husband, staging it as a suicide to claim the life insurance money and start a new life together. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Thorne ordered a more thorough forensic analysis of the crime scene, which uncovered trace amounts of a powerful sedative in a glass found in Darren's study. Toxicology reports on Darren's body rushed through the lab, confirmed the presence of the same drug in his system. Perhaps most shockingly, Thorne uncovered evidence suggesting that Darren had been involved in the death of his first wife. What had been ruled an accidental overdose years ago now appeared suspiciously like a carefully orchestrated murder. The detective's theory began to take shape. Scarlett, trapped in an abusive marriage and aware of Darren's criminal activities, had seduced Chris not out of passion, but as part of a calculated plan. She had manipulated the young man's resentment towards his father, convincing him that eliminating Darren was not just for their love, but an act of long overdue justice. Their plan, it seemed, had been to drug Darren and stage his suicide, but something had gone wrong. Whether Darren had realized what was happening, or the dosage had been miscalculated, he had awakened and confronted them earlier than expected. The ensuing chaos had led to the violent confrontation, and Darren's death, not by his own hand, but likely shot by Scarlett in what she would claim was self-defense. As Thorne pieced together this narrative, he was struck by the tragedy of it all. Chris, a young man damaged by years of paternal neglect and abuse, had been drawn into a web of manipulation by the very woman he thought would save him. Scarlett, while undoubtedly a victim of Darren's cruelty, had chosen a path of deception and violence that had spiraled out of control. The truth Thorne realized was far more complex than any simple narrative of a love affair gone wrong. It was a story of generational trauma, abuse of power, and the desperate lengths people would go to escape their circumstances. A story that would forever change the way Sunnyside viewed the family it had once admired. Prosecutors painted a damning picture of Scarlett as a cold, calculating woman who had seduced her teenage stepson and manipulated him into helping her murder her husband. They presented evidence of the affair, the life insurance policy, and the inconsistencies in Scarlett's initial statements to the police. The defense, however, argued that Scarlett was a victim of years of abuse at Darren's hands. They portrayed her actions as desperate attempts to escape a controlling, violent husband. Chris's testimony became a central point of contention, with the defense claiming his memory was unreliable due to his head injury and the trauma of the event. Expert witnesses were called to testify about the effect of long-term abuse, the reliability of memories formed during traumatic events, and the complex financial dealings of his company. Each day brought new revelations and twists, keeping the town on edge. The most dramatic moment came when Scarlett herself took the stand. Her testimony was a mix of tearful remorse and steely determination. She admitted to the affair with Chris, but insisted that Darren's death had been unplanned, a result of his violent attack on them. Her performance was compelling, leaving many in the courtroom, and those watching the televised proceedings unsure of what to believe. Scarlett, who had maintained her composure throughout the trial, finally crumbled as the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, citing the premeditated nature of the crime and the manipulation of her stepson. The spectators fired out their animated discussions, a mix of vindication and disbelief. In the end, the true legacy of the Felton tragedy was not in its salacious details or courtroom drama, but in the quiet reflections it prompted in countless homes. It forced a reckoning with the complexities of human nature, the insidious nature of abuse, and the devastating consequences of choices made in desperation.